So Tina Tchen is an executive vice president and chief strategy and impact officer at the Obama Foundation, where she is responsible for leading the foundation's strategy. Evan Wolfson founded Freedom to Marry and is widely considered the architect of the campaign that won marriage equality in the US. And finally, Jawanza Williams, the managing director of organizing at Vocal New York, who unapologetically brings into his work as a community organizer his intersecting identities as a Black, radical queer, prison abolitionist, socialist, feminist, and Christian. Leading this conversation will be our very own fierce and fearless leader, Ann Oliva, a woman who I have had the privilege to call my boss, my friend, and my sister in this work for more than 15 years. We know what is coming, and we know it is going to be hard. So let's get into formation and slay. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ann, Tina, Evan, and Jawanza. Thank you.
Oh, good God. Hi, everybody. Oh, are we on? Hi, everybody. Again. Just so you know, I'm sitting in today for our good friend, also from this great state of Minnesota, Jennifer Ho. She was going to moderate this panel, but unfortunately can't be with us today. So I'm going to do my best. Let her know if I carried the water for her when you see her. Thank you all for being here. And I didn't actually prep Senator Smith to talk about organizing, but she sure did set us up nicely for this conversation. So you all know, folks who are in the audience, that over the last couple of days, a lot of our sessions have been focused on what it takes to get people rehoused, right? Like the technical work of getting people rehoused, and appropriately so, right? That's how we get people home right now. And the people who are in this room have the technical skills to do that work and to build on as we, really experience new challenges. But we've also talked about advocacy, the need for organizing at the local, state, and national levels, and how we might capitalize on this moment in time to create the change that we want to see in the long term. But when we talk about advocacy, what does that mean for us in real life, right? The question is, how do we plan for the long term, and what tools do we need to reach all of our goals? So today on this stage, as Marcy said, we have three brilliant organizers and movement builders. They come at this work from three very different angles, but what I hope to achieve in today's conversation is an understanding of the difference between movement building and mobilizing, what has worked in their respective experiences, and how those experiences can inform how we approach what we need to do in the coming years. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to start with a question for all of you. I hope that this is a conversation that we engage in together. And I'm going to start with the most basic question, and that is, why is organizing important in social justice work? And what can happen if we don't organize when we're faced with the situation that we're faced with right now, a Supreme Court decision that's pretty devastating for folks, anti-homelessness work being funded by billionaires? What's at stake, and why is it important? So why don't we start with you, Tina?
Well, thanks, Anna, and it's really great to be here, to sort of be back here, because I was here with my former boss when she was First Lady, Michelle Obama, to speak to this conference. Right. Gosh, almost like 10 years ago plus, I guess now. So it's wonderful to be back here with all of you at this important time. And I think, and the question, you sort of answered it, which is what happens when you don't organize? Like what we're living through right now is what happens, right? And I do think we let the foot off the gas, speaking as progressives and on the left, after, Barack Obama was elected president, that organizing, grassroots organizing, the foot kind of came off. We sort of took some things for granted. And meanwhile, guess what? The other side was organizing. They were doing block and tackling work on those, local races that nobody's paying attention to, because those local races then lead to the state house, that leads to controlling the governor's office, that lead to then controlling Congress. And they figured that out in ways that we have been slow to, I will admit, on the left. And, I would submit, when I started my work back in Chicago as, precinct worker, organizer, doing the work to get Harold Washington elected, the first Black mayor of Chicago. That's how I cut my teeth trying to get the ERA passed in the 70s. And it is all about that grassroots organizing. When we were talking earlier, I said, Barack Obama does not become president of the United States without grassroots organizing. It did not happen without people on the ground like you supporting him when nobody else believed in him, doing that basic talk to your neighbors and convince them. And that's the kind of work we need to do.
Thanks. Jawanza, let's go to you.
Well, I'm also very honored to be here. Well, before I can really begin to even respond to this question about organizing, the need to organize, and what's at stake, I would be remiss in this period, in this time that we're in, thinking about human rights and displacement and homelessness, to not mention that we need a ceasefire in Gaza. And it's still happening, and it's very much something that we all should be conscious of and we should be fighting for, and making sure that all of the people around the world are taken care of in Sudan and in Congo and in the United States. But I'll move on from there and just say, and organizing, it's a very important concept and idea for us to grapple with and to fully understand and to have some shared language about what exactly are we talking about. Organization fundamentally is about transformation. It is about building power. When we lose, and we lose a lot in this country, we're losing today, it's a measure of our power. So it's easy to mobilize 10,000 people into the streets. We had 3,000 people or so outside the Supreme Court at the beginning of the Grants Pass hearing. And this rogue, right-wing, violent, fascist majority on the Supreme Court still made a decision that is anti-life, that is death dealing. And the reason why they're able to do that isn't just because of the way that our state is organized. It's because our communities, our social movements have not amassed enough power to be able to meaningfully respond. So organizing is about how do we do that now and into the long-term future. And to be clear, I think what's at stake, and I think this has already been sort of referenced, is annihilation. The distance between displacement or homelessness and the kind of violence we're experiencing in the United States politically, experientially, corporeally, it's the same idea, the same ideologies. And I love bringing up bell hooks in the sort of opening here that lead to the violence of police shooting and killing Black and brown poor people, the same kind of violence that leads to widespread gender-based violence. All of the ideas behind those practices and phenomena are the same reasons why we can't respond meaningfully to the climate crisis. It's the same reason why we can't respond meaningfully to the housing and homelessness crisis. So I think that we have to build a big tent, and that's why I'm a working class leader, a socialist, because the working class is a big tent. It includes most of us. And what does it look like for a working class to organize together, to build institutions, to build social movements that last beyond an individual issue-based campaign, beyond an electoral campaign, and into the future that helps us craft the kind of world that we actually want to live in? Because honestly, what's different for us in this period than any other period in human history is that we are the ones that have to literally save all organized human life. And ending homelessness is very much at the center of doing that work.
Thanks, Jawanza. Evan, I'm asking you the same question. Why is organizing important? What can happen if we don't do it?
So organizing is important because change takes time. It takes tenacity, persevering through the time and the disappointments and the challenges. It takes a team, because no one person, no one organization, no one battle is going to do it all. And it takes tactics. It takes a variety of what Dr. King called the methodologies of change: litigation, legislation, public education, direct action, fundraising, organizing, and electoral work. So without organizing, you're not able to build the resources, to build the power, to build the team, to bring people together, to sustain yourself and your cause for the work that it will require to achieve a change you want in the world. And of course, we all want many changes in the world. There are many things we would all like to fix, and you're not going to fix them all at once. And if you wait to fix all of them, if you hold off on fixing any of them until you can fix all of them, you will probably not fix any of them. So we all have to be about something and build on the something. And the way to do that is by having enough people together to make sure that enough of that is happening to make the world go in the direction we want it to go. But having said that, I also want to point out that if you follow that answer, I put organizing in what I would call a methodology of social change. It is one of the elements of the work, one of the tools in our toolbox. And to me, organizing to be effective has to serve, first and foremost, a goal, and then secondly, a strategy. In order to really be effective in achieving change, those somethings that add up, hopefully, to the everything we want to see, you have to be clear about what is it you're trying to achieve. You have to be able to define that in a way that you can organize your own work most effectively and summon others to rally to that goal. And from that goal, you have to know what is the strategy, what is the pathway, what I usually define as whom do I need to move to do what, when, in order to get what I want. What will it take to win? And then to that strategy, toward the goal, you bring in the methodologies, the work plan, the team, the building blocks that will get you there. So organizing is very, very important, as all three of us have said and as you teed it up. But organizing to be effective also has to be understood as in order to achieve what and by what means, through influencing whom, by getting what to happen. And until you do that, you may be doing good work, but it won't necessarily be assembled most effectively to achieve a change upon which then you build for the next change and the next change and the next change.
There's a thread, there's a common thread across what all of you are saying around your experiences. And I'm going to get to that common thread in a minute, but I want to dig down into each of your particular areas of expertise and ask some questions, because our audience are the ones that are going to be doing this work in their communities and alongside us at the national level. And Tina, I'm going to go back to you for the first question. So I met you when you were working in the White House. And in some of the prep calls, I heard you and Evan going back and forth about what it was like for you to be on the inside and Evan to be on the outside, working towards sort of some common goals. So you have the unique position on this panel of having been both inside, being advocated to, which I have also had a little bit of that, not the way you did, but close, and on the outside. So from your perspective, what can good advocacy accomplish? And where are the opportunities for people who are in this audience, people who are leaders in their communities, people with lived experience of homelessness, people who are on the front lines of this work, all of those folks, what are their opportunities and where do you see the gaps that we need to fill?
Well, it's interesting because Evan does and will tell me where this experience that I had on the whole issue of LGBT rights during the Obama administration sort of wasn't exactly what was happening on the ground. But I think what Ann is referring to is I often reflect on this and I tell other organizations and other movements about this is the way we in the Obama administration experienced the push for LGBT rights was the LGBT very broad coalition of folks who are, cared about gay marriage, folks who cared about don't ask, don't tell, folks who cared about employment rights, right, and discrimination rights, coming together and presenting us with a kind of what we experienced as an agreed upon agenda across this broad coalition to start with repeal of don't ask, don't tell first, then move to gay marriage, then move to ending employment discrimination as kind of a roadmap for how, and they came together and we experienced it as people were coming in, not just, the don't ask, don't tell folks coming in, but also Human Rights Coalition and everyone else saying, no, we agree. Let's try to move, the repeal don't ask, don't tell bill first, which was really clarifying when you are an administration faced with a very long list of things that we needed to get done. We were trying to get done in these first 2 years, including things like healthcare reform, right, and immigration reform, and getting us out of the greatest recession since the Depression. And that I often say to advocates who are in broad-based movements, that's really helpful when you're advocating. When you go to the Hill this afternoon, having a really clear agenda, and those legislators don't just hear it once, they hear it 10 times with every person from different things coming in is really clarifying. Now, that requires, and I come out of a lifelong work on gender equity work. We are perhaps, every movement will say this, but we were perhaps one of the most fractured movements around because, we've got, abortion rights and we've got, employment rights and we've got anti-gender-based violence and, just go down the list. And that's partially why we're not effective is because we need to work in a broad coalition. We need to come together. We need for some people's issue to take the forefront at one moment and others to accept that and step back and support them and realize that's the moment. We're in a moment right now where abortion rights is critical. That's one of the keys to how do you unlock the rest. But coalition work is hard and it requires mutual respect and sometimes self-sacrifice and sometimes trust, always trust, actually, not sometimes trust, always trust in your colleagues that I'm going to support you now and then my time will come, because that's how we advance the agenda. And I will submit right now, staying in our various C3 roles, but we are in a moment where the choices between a vision of all of our issues on one point of view is very clear and against all of our issues is very clear, and all of the issues between climate change and homelessness and equal rights for all and abortion rights and healthcare are all lined up in the same way, and they're all under attack from the same place. And now is the time in your local communities especially to do that outreach and coalition work with your colleagues, people who you may not normally work with because they're not really in the homelessness space, but they're in the gender-based violence space. Well, guess what? There's a total link there, and we know that, and now is the time to build those broad-based coalitions.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about allyship in a minute, but I want to turn to Jawanza. When we did our first prep call, you said to me on that call something that really stuck with me, and that I think is something. It's a way of looking at this that I had not thought about before. You said, mobilizing is temporary, organizing is eternal. Mobilizing is temporary, organizing is eternal. Can you explain to our audience what that means and why you see organizing as the key in our pursuit of housing justice in New York and nationwide?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, that quote is actually from Kwame Ture, who used to be called Stokely Carmichael, Pan-Africanist, who in his final years was working to unify Africa under scientific socialism, and is an incredible leader, organizer, and teacher for so many of us about how to build power and how to build social movements that are genuinely going to transform the conditions that we're experiencing to advance life. Because he'd say all the time that the purpose of life is to advance life. But the reason I always talk about it is because I think that there's been a catastrophe in the United States of sort of like grassroots political movements in the way that we talk about organizing. So folks are like, we got to mobilize, we got to mobilize, we got to mobilize. And absolutely, mobilization is within the toolbox of organizing. But organizing is about not just getting people to come to a thing. I can get 50 people into a room, but how many of those people can actually tell me that we need to end homelessness? Because housing is a human right. I want people to be able to understand that and to say that. And organizing is about helping people come to new degrees of consciousness. It's about helping people understand and locate themselves, their experiences, their issues, their organization, their city, etc., within a bigger story. A story that allows an opening for other people to be a part of our shared story. Because I'm talking about developing and building solidarity. I'm talking about developing and building commitment and to organization, to other people. We need to be accountable to a base. So I work at Vocal New York, a statewide grassroots membership organization building power to end AIDS, homelessness, mass incarceration, the drug war, and to build an economy and democracy that works for all of us. And we organize a homelessness union, and I'm here representing them right now. And we also have a Vocal Texas and a Vocal Kentucky of the same mission. And, you know, folks experiencing homelessness, helping us not just tell their stories to bleed for sympathy in the public so that people can feel bad about homelessness. No, people are telling their stories to establish authority. I'm telling my story about experiencing homelessness so you understand why I know what is the appropriate policy response. And the organizing is about helping that be the reality. What's the political education that needs to take place on an ongoing basis? Where's the worldview offering that needs to take place? Because newsflash, just because you are directly impacted by homelessness, like so many of us have been and will continue to be in this country until we win, does not mean you're not a white supremacist, violent fascist who is not interested in ending homelessness. So we have to do the work of transforming people. If our people are saying things that are anti-human, then we don't just leave them there. We have to create vectors of change, vectors of conversation. And that takes organization because it takes time and expertise. And it won't happen in these flashpoints of outrage when you see 10,000 people come out into the streets because of some horrific thing, which is a good thing, to be clear. As Dr. Cornel West often says, the day that no one shows up, that's a catastrophe. So we're still showing up. There's still a heart in this country to be saved, to be grown. And I think that organizing has a lot to do with that. So, and again, to be clear, I think we all should be members of organizations that are in the fight for the long haul, not just to end homelessness, but to transform society into an egalitarian society that is gender conscious and expansive, class conscious, anti-racist, that is internationally focused, understanding our responsibility as the one sitting at the actual epicenter of empire of the Western Hemisphere right here in DC, which is why I had to mention Gaza. And yeah, so all of these things, I'm just trying to make it clear that when we're responding to homelessness, especially for those of us who are service providers, who are meeting the immediate direct needs of people who are in crisis, if those needs are not met, that they will die. Because remember, the consequence of homelessness is premature death. So the service provision is absolutely imperative because you cannot build a social movement without human beings. And human beings cannot be in a social movement. They cannot wage a social movement if they are all dead. So we got to do both things. We got to hold the complexity. And I think that organizing helps us understand that what's going to be the issue-based campaigns that are going to be the stepping stones to get us towards our big structural transformative experiences, which will require more power, and which will also require the kind of leadership that understands that we have to go there, and that it might take 10, 15, 20 years, 50 years, like the Heritage Foundation knew, to undo Roe v. Wade. So what's our 50-year North Star? And I think it has to center ending homelessness as a structural phenomena, as a political phenomenon. We have to have the courage to demand of both of our capitalist parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, that we need to be really asking ourselves about markets. Should market forces be controlling how housing is distributed in the society?
So I want to just amplify one thing Jawanza said about the long haul, because I think we do this on the left a lot. And this is my experience, for example, when Barack Obama got elected in 2008, and we started to try to do healthcare reform and everything in 2009, everybody went home. They were like, we did our job. You're in the White House now. Like, you fix it. And guess what? That's not the way this works. And we have a tendency to do that. Every time we get a win or we move forward, we're like, we're done. You know, there was a moment after gay marriage where we all thought, oh, we have achieved LGBT equity, right? Guess what? Right? We're living through that backlash that was always going to come, but we kind of got, you know, fat and comfortable sitting back and thinking that it was, and that Jawanza's message about this is a long haul effort through every win, through every loss. We have to stick with it. It's a lifelong commitment. I remember in a gender equity meeting with a celebrity who said, well, how long do I have to do this? And somebody else leans over and says, for the rest of your life. Right? That's what this requires.
I think it's, I mean, just so important to say that, because I think a lot of times, you know, people say words like neoliberalism and it confuses people because it sounds confusing, but essentially the way that I think about it, it's, we might have some progressive ideas, we, like our politicians, we might want to, you know, not see so many people experiencing homelessness, but there's no desire to fundamentally transform our systems. There's no desire to say this system doesn't need to exist and maybe a new one needs to be built. I'm always talking about what are the infrastructures that we need to build. We have so much infrastructure of violence in the society, but we don't have very much infrastructure of care. How are we going to build that? And sometimes that means we need a paradigm shift, means we have to ask ourselves some fundamental questions about the origin of our society. I love that Native folks came up in this conversation earlier. Like, there are fundamental questions at the core of American politics that absolutely have to be grappled with if we are to understand the problem. Because the problem isn't just not having four walls. The problem is, why do people think that it's okay that some people don't have and some people have, as I heard earlier, 17 jets? What's up with that?
So we've, you go ahead and clap, that's great. So Evan, we've touched on your work multiple times in this conversation, and I wanna come back to you. And I remember very vividly, as most probably people in this room do, the day that the Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality. And as an architect of that movement, can you tell us about how your movement was organized, how you thought about failure, how you thought about the long haul as somebody who actually achieved the goal that they set out to do?
So one important part of that answer is that I distinguish between a movement and a campaign.
Yes.
A movement is a multiplicity. Many people, many organizations, many perspectives, many priorities, many different views about tactics, many egos, etc. And that multiplicity is the ecosystem which hopefully will be fermenting and contributing to the progress that that movement in a very general way wants, but may not agree on exactly how to define or how to achieve. A campaign is, in my mind, the way in which an effective activist, an effective organization organizes in order to achieve a goal, to achieve a change, to achieve progress, which will then inevitably only be a building block toward the next change needed, the broader changes wanted, as we continue in this long haul toward the world we want, which will not be achieved by any one anything, including a long discussion about all kinds of theories and ideologies and perspectives, though those are important parts of what contributes to people's understanding and success. So in order to succeed, you need both a movement, that multiplicity, and a campaign. And you need other things as well. You need a strategy. You need clarity about that strategy. Now, a movement typically will not agree on a strategy or on a goal, because a movement consists of multiple perspectives, etc. And that's okay, because you don't need the movement to agree on everything. When Tina talked about, and we discussed this on the phone the other day, when, from your perspective, our movement seems so incredibly organized, when I was sitting here thinking, wow, we thought we were like your movement, completely fractious and divided. Part of the reason that Tina sitting in the White House experienced our movement that way is because we did have some coordination and some trust and some relationships that sustained us through disagreements, et cetera. But it was also because those of us who were pressing the Obama administration to take particular actions understood that at that particular timing in the work, what we needed from them was more, in a sense, relevant and focused when it came to the military work than it was at that stage on the marriage work. And so I could go into the White House and say to my friends there, you're not doing enough. It's not going to be good. No matter what you do, it won't be enough until you get to marriage. But I didn't have to be scorched earth about it because I wasn't needing them to do that right now. I was just planting those seeds and cultivating that relationship and placing the marker for later.
It worked.
While, of course, also supporting the building block of ending the military discrimination, which we could then leverage toward the next, and by next, I don't mean sequential, I mean coming stage of the campaign, which was a longer campaign to win the freedom to marry. So that goes back to this question of whom do I need to move to do what when, which is strategy that will enable a campaign to leverage a movement to get to a particular achievement, which then you then build on to get further and further along. The other point I would just make is that not everybody agreed on anything I just said. You know, this is what I thought. This is how I led my piece of the work. This is how I pushed and engaged and cajoled and navigated my movement, but also the larger movement that we were able to engender amongst other people who didn't consider themselves part of the ecosystem in which we began, the LGBT movement, but who were allies and who were non-gay people and parents who wanted their kids to be able to marry and others who believed in a just society and could respond to the values of love. People who were catalyzed and brought in by the goal, the strategy, the teamwork, the leadership, and the building blocks of success, the actual achievements, not just the rhetoric. It wasn't just getting up there and talking about gay and talking about marriage. It was changing the realities by winning some cases, by achieving some policy changes, by bringing forth some messengers, including unexpected messengers, eventually President Obama, and so on and so on. So the other point I want to make and underscore is, again, this idea that nobody ever agreed on the whole thing, and that's okay. What you need to think about in your work as an individual, as an organization, even as a coalition, is how do you find the critical mass of work and support and success toward a goal on a strategy upon which you will build and catalyze others. This is how change happens. If you wait until there's agreement or wait until everyone is fully educated, you will be waiting a very long time, and so will the people you're trying to help and serve. And so while winning marriage was never something the entire movement agreed on, and even those of us who prioritized work on it worked on other things, and even those of us who prioritized working on it understood that it was never going to be the end and never thought we would be done the day we won, but that instead it would be a transformational achievement that would give us a building block which we could then harness to the next and the next and the next and the next thing that we needed to achieve, including, by the way, not just LGBT gains, but reinvigorating and strengthening our democracy itself to the betterment of all other causes that we cared about.
Can I add one other point, Ann, which is the other thing that we experienced, and President Obama was actually really good at saying this is, and for those of you who actually happen to work for, or you're in public office now, or you're working for a housing agency, like, don't be afraid of the organizing. I mean, originally when I ran the Office of Public Engagement, people were worried about bringing in the loud voices to meet with the president. And he was like, no, I want to hear them. And he would say to them when they met, your job is to push me, right? Because he was a former organizer and he was unusual as a public official in that regard, which he understood the role of organizing to push. So it is important to do, even if it's your friend, even if it's Senator Tina Smith, right? That you've got to push, because that is the role of making social change happen, of being an organizer, is to push even your allies, because they need that push. They need to be able to go into the caucus room and then say, well, my phone is blowing up, right? Because we have to do this. And so what you're about to do this afternoon is incredibly important. It's incredibly important even with your friends, so that you're very loud with your friends, even so that they are, then well armed to go to their colleagues to say, this is really important. It's a fundamental right. It's an issue that we have to pay attention to, because I'm getting blown up by my constituents to do that. And that's why, again, back to your original question, Anna, about why is organizing so important? It's an essential way democracy moves. This is what we have to fight for to protect our democracy too, because this is how we make our voices heard. This is how we get our voices translated into policy and to change. And we need to also protect that so that we enable that to keep happening.
I think that actually reminds me of a very critical piece. It's brilliant. Is at Vocal New York, we're often talking about, there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies when it comes to politicians. Like I was saying this morning, you could be a frothing at the mouth fascist on Monday, and if you transform on Tuesday, on Wednesday we'll be at the press conference together because you're committed to ending homelessness. So what is the work that's going to take over time to get people there? And I think another thing I wanted to make sure I say before our conversation comes to a close is I also came in to talk a lot about institutional organizing. We've been talking primarily about organizing people into organization, organizing people into issue-based campaigns, into social movements. We also should be organizing organizations into the movement. So if you're a service provider and you serve 600 people experiencing homelessness a week, where's your programming to help people develop their civic consciousness? Where's your partnership with grassroots membership organizations to make sure that those people are being connected into spaces to build political power to achieve the kind of structural policy changes that they actually need and that their communities need? Because you can serve people all you can, but if the service provision that they actually need is illegal or unavailable, then what are you going to do? So that requires a structural transformation, a social change. And the last thing I'll say is, every single person, we should not assume apathy. We should assume either people don't understand the scope or the gravity of the problem, or that they are intimidated by the seemingly gargantuan nature of the big problems in our society, that they can't be solved because it's just too much. I think we don't lecture as much. I think we ask questions. And just as an example, if you ask a person, hey, do you know how many people are experiencing homelessness in the United States? And they don't know, or maybe they'll say, I don't know, 600,000 people. And I'm going to say, you know what? That's a lot of people, right? And they're going to say, probably. And I'm going to say, how many of those people experiencing homelessness is okay? And if any answer other than 0 is said, then some work needs to happen with that person. And maybe if you're trying to build power and trying to build an organization and trying to build a political project, maybe that's not the person you talk to come to the meeting.
So just to add on to that, I would say that the people you were just describing in this last part are the people I thought of as the reachable but not yet reached. And I distinguished between them and the true opponents. And most of our enemy, we had to understand our opponents, we had to know what they were up to, we had to know our opposition research and so on. But our primary focus was not the opponents. The primary focus was our base, the people who were really kind of on our side, whom we either needed to mobilize or ideally mobilize and organize, and the reachable but not yet reached. And when you're thinking about those people, how do you bring them over to where you want them to be? First, in understanding and empathy, and then second, ideally in action. You first of all don't want to be pushing them into the camp of the opponents by coming at them in the wrong way, in a way that they won't connect to, that won't help them rise, etc. And then secondly, you want to be able to bring them along and ultimately bring them in and organize them, or at least help them to take action in their most effective way, and so on. And so part of the lesson of that is, when you go out into the world, it's not enough to know what you think. It's not enough to know your vision of what's the right answer, though that is a good place to start. You have to also think about, whom am I trying to move and what will help them move? What do they need to hear, particularly understanding, as we've all said, that we may not agree on everything, but we may be able to agree on some things. And those some things may be enough for the critical mass of achievement that we want to bring forward and then build on. So it's not about what plays well to you. It's not even about what plays well to your base, though that can be an element of what you need to put out into the world. What you really need to be thinking about is what is going to bring together the critical mass, which will include the reachable but not yet reached, that will enable me to get the job done upon which I will build. And just to give one concrete example of that, when we were progressively changing public opinion, in part in order to create space to then call on the political people and others to rise within a space we had helped create for them, we had to think about what will move the people we needed to move. And toward the end, we had gotten a huge amount of support, but not quite enough. And so we had to once again think about who are the people we have not yet gotten, even on top of the strength and movement that we had already achieved. And what was clear with those people, sort of the final swath of public support we needed to grow. When I started the work, we were at 11%. By 2010, and my arguing with my friends in the White House, we had gotten to a fragile majority, and in some places a majority, and within the base certainly a majority, and within the Democratic Party a majority. But it wasn't yet enough to deliver the win. And so we needed to figure out how are we going to grow that 51, 52, 53% support into a strong enough support that would encourage others to come in and get the job done, including ultimately the decision maker in the Supreme Court. And what was clear with those people, that final swath of people we needed to move, they needed to hear a particular set of messages and messengers and achievements that weren't the ones that had grown us from 11% to 51, 52, 53%. So we could have stuck with what we were doing, or we could have thought about what do those people need to hear that will enable them to come join us, to move forward. And by cracking that code and deploying that work and engaging those people, even when people in our own base were saying, well, why are you talking about non-gay families? Why are you talking about non-gay family members? Why are you putting forward messages that centered on what I thought of as non-gay validators? Why aren't you showing more gay couples and so on? And it's because that's not what those people needed to hear, even if it's what makes you feel good. And my job was not to make myself feel good through rhetoric or through the comfort of my base. My job was to deliver a win. And that's how we did it.
Whoa. I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but I'm getting the blinking red light, which means that I'm going to get the hook in just a minute off the stage. I hope that you can all see why we asked these three incredible leaders to come here and talk to us today. And please, thank you. Give them a huge round of applause. Thanks to all of you so much for all the work that you've done, for what you have done for our country, for what you've done for New York, for what you've done for our movements. I just want you to know that we appreciate you and that we're going to be back in your email soon talking to you about how we take what you have done and talked about today and make this work for our movement. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Good luck.